Person, it's not so bad example, but I think that paint it will be more better stuff instead of persons. When you have a paint program, you have the tools here, for example. Or you have the lines and you're able to draw here. Shapes here. When you're designing that programs, you always designing that you never know how many tools, shapes you will have in future, or you didn't know how many tools you will have in your toolbox. Maybe you added more tools here. And how to design your program to work in for more updates in future. When you're designing in object-oriented programming stuff, you start thinking which objects you need to create. And maybe we have our paint program, and our paint program have some objects. You're able to create separate objects for each panel item, like clipboard, image, tools, shapes, colors, and so on. It really depends on your goal at the moment. If you would like to say that we designing our paint program, then we should to create paint, class paint. We have our object paint, and in our paint program we have some fields. And our fields maybe will be tools, shapes, colors. You're able to see that tools, or just any, you're able to name, say that list, tools. List, shapes. List, colors. And we have our paint program, which is have nested elements, which is list of tools, list of shapes, list of colors. Now we need to create another object, and if we have the list of tools, we should create a tool first. Tool. And tool will be when you're creating tool, you should say what is a tool. Draw, pencil, fill with colors, text, magnifier, color picker, and eraser. And basically for tool we creating, for example, string name, because we need text. And you're able to create some method or function. For example, select tool. And yeah, we have two stuff to do. And if you need more functionality, you're able to add it more later. But basically each tool in Paint has the same goal, same stuff like name and of course description, but we don't need it at the moment. We need a name, and you're able to select here. And when you have select tool, we need also, maybe it's enough to select, and that's it at the moment. And when you have tool, you should say that which tool you're implementing here. Because we don't know, we able to say that name of tool is that, and select function will be just select that tool and maybe say the name, which tool you selected, or to mark that tool when you click it here. True, false. Now we should implement tool, because when you say here is a tool, you don't know which tool is here. If you need how to explain that, you have abstract type, which is a tool, which is when you're creating any tool in your design way. When you're creating class like tool, you don't know which tool you're adding in future. For example, we adding magic wand from Photoshop. Magic wand, for example, or background eraser, and so on. And you don't know, but you know that all tools should have the name and select tool option or function. Maybe function we should write like this. And now here is a parent stuff tool. And when you're implementing this, you should say that we using or extending. Extending, that means that tool that get all stuff from that class which is public or protected. Child classes, here is a child class. Maybe I will mark that child is yellow, parent is blue. And here is our first tool, which is pencil. And pencil maybe has the same info. If you have the same info, you don't need to repeat that, because you extending or just inherit that stuff if public. And maybe pencil has different functionality or function list. What he able do? The pencil able to draw something, and you just implement function draw. Maybe draw on blank space, on paper, blank space. No, maybe draw. It's enough. Yeah, we have a draw function, and we have another tool which is not a pencil but eraser. Erase. You will see the difference between the pencil maybe draw, eraser erase, but tool has the same name and select tool option, because we see that there is no difference in that group. Basically, you are reusing your properties and functions in child classes. And here you're able to create, you're able to extend different functionality for pencil, for eraser, for any tool you're adding in future. Maybe we have more magnifier. Zoom in, zoom out. Oh, we just have different stuff. We extending the same. We have inheritance, and it's not so great. No, why it's so. Maybe there is some connections. Okay, default arrow is not so great, but it's okay for demonstration now. We have connection because we know that tool is pencil, eraser, magnifier, or any tool. You're able to add more properties if you need it. For example, int or maybe double. In, double in out. Well, basically we're creating some properties like double in out. That means when we're zooming, well, when we out, well, or doesn't matter. We're creating some extra properties for that magnifier. And you're able to create for any other tool your own stuff. And now, of course, if the eraser is not the final, able to implement another child class if you need it. And say eraser is like hand eraser. Basically, you're able to have inheritance multiple levels if you need it. Because if you don't know which type of eraser you have, you able to add more child elements and say that, oh, here's the eraser, but I don't know which type of eraser I pick. Maybe it's hand eraser, maybe it's digital, maybe it's any, doesn't matter which. But yeah, you're able to make more deep levels of hierarchy here. But we don't use it at the moment. And we have our paint object, which is also parent class. And basically there is no connection between those tools. There is connection which is called composition when using the object tool inside that paint class. Basically we're using our list, or in C++ is vector, which is made from tool, or tool. We holding in our paint class, we holding all tools, shapes and colors. For a moment we creating only that tools. How to implement that in our program? We should open our CLine or any other IDE. Basically the classes is for data, or to write data on template, as a template. When you're creating project, we picking our C++ executable, and we say we're creating paint custom program. In our case, I'm just zooming like this. We should learn what is a class. Class basically represents what is the object. If you need to implement class tool, you're just creating new C++ class and say it paint. When you're creating class paint, basically it creates separate files. One for header file, one for C++ file. First file is for your design, how your data looks like here. Void show exit. Okay. Now we see our paint. As I mentioned before, we're using our collection or container vector, which is a dynamic array. And if you would like to hold some dynamic amount of items, you should use some dynamic structures like vector. There is other structures like queue and stack and so on, but those other structures is for other type information. And vector basically same as an array. When you're creating vector, you should include vector. and we should using namespace std. Why? Because it's easier to write the code. Because if you're not using namespace std, you always should place std, std, std on vectors, on strings, on and so on. When you're learning, it's really a great idea to use that. When you're creating production code, basically it's not the best practice to use that, because in some places your code will be not readable at all, because you don't know which method you're using from which namespace. And yeah, in future you should use namespaces. In class, what you need to know in the class. Class is a template for your data. And in our design, we designing our data, paint or paint object. And we know that we need vector tool, which is holding tools. Yeah. And we should know that we able to modify to control access. If you write private, that means you're not able to read the data from outside or from any class, from any method, from main, from anywhere. Private is private and only allows in your block, to use in your block or in scope, like in Paint 8, C++, I will show how to use it in the same scope private members. Basically, there is private properties, like 90% of usage, you're using private properties all the time, if it's possible to make that. That mention you're able to hide and control your data. It's really best practice for that. Private, we creating our private vector, and we say which type information we holding here. If you say integer, that means in vector you're able to holding integer values, like normal arrays when you see examples with those brackets. Why you need that? Because if you have bracket with int, that means in vector you're not able to add any other value. If you try to add it, you will get some compile time error, which is better than runtime, because when you're running program and you run crashing, it's really not great. But when you get compiling problems, you will see when you're writing your code. For that reason, vector is really great class, and vector is also class. And we're holding our tool because we need to create our class tool. And we say that our class is tools. But now we doesn't have the class tool. We should create new class tool. Tool. And we created empty class, but in our paint H, we're able to include that. You including tool. Oh, sorry. Double quotes, it's for personal files or in project level files or any files. When you're including or when you have brackets, it's system files. Tool H. That means you connected your two files to that paint. Like tool H, you connected to paint program. And now it should work. We have our vector, which is tools. Next step is to create public fields or public stuff, because we need to have some public stuff. The best public methods will be to add some tools to list, or to create some function, for example, void add tool, and you passing some tool. And also we're able to create some function which is return all tools in Paint program. Vector. Oh, sorry, not vector. Oh, yeah, vector. Sorry. Vector tool. Here is a function return type. We know that our function return vector of tool. And we say that get tools. Yeah. Add tool, get tools, able to remove tools if you need to add more functionality. We have only two functions now. Add and get. And now you should implement those two functions. Implementation will go to the C++ file. And here you see we included paint H. That means you connected your file H to that C++ file. Basically that means you included that code. This single line basically says that you included that stuff. Instead of doing that, basically you just including single line and you know that you already have that stuff. It's invisible for you at the moment, but we have like this code here in your memory, or if you don't know, you're just able to use that. There is some class name or this reference and so on. I will show you how you should implement those two stuff. First, you should write the class name. Or if you need to implement void add tool, you should write void paint double dots, and you're able to pick add tool, get tools, for example. Add tool, it automatically generates stuff. And when you're writing here, you're implementing like this, or you're able to delete that. Here is say that here is the scope of your class. That means you're able to pick any private fields properties from that scope from here, because you in paint class. If you're removing this, basically instead of paint class, it will be only add tool as a function, not dependent on paint class. Not dependent on paint class, and you're not able to reach tools object private or private property. If you try to reach tools, you're not able to reach. If you're adding class scope paint, then you're able to reach that tools, and you're able to use your vector or list. If you're deleting, basically that means a different scope. How to get those tools properties? If you have more than once, you're able to call like paint double, and you're able to see all fields and methods inside that class. It will be the same, or you're able to write this dot tools. It will be the same. Or if you know that there is tools, you just write tools. There is plenty of options how to able to use it to reach that property tools. And when you're adding to tools, you should write tools and place back to add object tool, because our array or vector holds tool objects. And we don't need to say that we adding only pencil, or we adding only eraser, and so on. We just say we designing our paint program able to add any tool to that toolbox, to our tools group section. And if you're creating any tool in future, you're able to add any tool because it's not dependent on that design. Yeah, and difference between pencil and tool, it's really better to use more abstract stuff. And more abstraction, more universal approach for your software design. Here we created our add tool function. Now we should implement our get tools. I will show how to generate from each file. You just able to hit Alt Enter and generate definition. That's it. Basically, you created your your implementation of getter. But of course, you should return not new object, but you're returning tools. Maybe you have some questions.
No.
Okay, we have two functions, add tool and get tools. This one returns vector or list of tools. We are returning tools. Basically, we implemented our functionality for paint class. Not all stuff, but only the single field, which is already implemented. That means in our test or in main, we're able to create our paint program. Oh, sorry. We should include paint where we're using paint H, not C++, and we're creating our paint object. When you're creating paint object, class depends on multiple instances, because if you need to create two different instances of paint program, for example, you should create two different paint objects, like paint 1, paint 2. It will be different paint windows, for example, or some objects. And here we're able to add tool, get tools. When you're adding, you're just adding tool, but we doesn't have any tools at the moment because we not implemented our tool class. We implemented only paint, but we should implement tool each class. And if you remember, we have string name and select tool function. We should use string name, and of course we should say private, public. And in public field, I recommend to create some constructor, which is when you're creating object tool, you're able to pass the name, for example. And it will be easier than create separate function to set name. Constructor is to construct your object and initialize default value. Here I should include stream. I should include, I should use using namespace std. And we have our tool name as a private, and public we creating our constructor. Tool constructor, we passing our string str. That's it. And we have constructor, and we should create getter to get value. He'll say string get name. It's all the way, but you're able to generate this stuff using cline, but I'm just writing myself now. And we have designed for our tool name and tool string pass when you're creating tool, and get name to get name for that tool. Oh, we also should create a select tool. Void select tool. For example, we just print, for example, selected tool. And now in tool C++, we should implement those. If you would like to generate, you're able to just enter Alt enter. Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's suggest to make explicit. Alt enter again, but it's only for constructor with single parameter. There is some option generate definition for constructor tool. You don't need to write a code, and you get basic stuff for beginning. When you're creating tool, you should say that our name is equals str. Why you need this? Because we need, when you're creating, add by default the name for tool. And when you have like this in your main C++, when you're creating tool, you're not able to create without constructor parameter, because in Paint there is no constructor parameters. That's the reason why you don't need it when you're creating instances. For this tool, you should pass parameter name. Custom tool, for example. And there is difference when you have constructor, when you doesn't have constructor, and when you have constructor. Basically, by default, you're initializing that name for tool. Oh, sorry. Yeah, you're initializing that field name. And string get name and select tool. You're able to just alt enter generate. Get name, it should returns name. And also we have other stuff. Tool also generates a lot of stuff when you're picking select tool. We got void on the top, and we got all brackets and so on. And here you should implement your functionality. Select tool, we need to print, for example, selected or you selected name. Sorry, and line. And as you see, we don't need to write any using namespace, std, and so on, because we including our tool age, which is including those two fields, and we don't need to write that code and so on. Basically, we focus to code or to write code only. We don't need to extra stuff added in our class. And you see that cout without std. And we created simple functions. Here the same name of constructor always will be the same name for constructor. For the class name tool, you should create tool name for method name, or I don't know. Just for tool class, you should repeat the same name of the class. And that means here is a constructor, but not a function. And if you need to add more constructors, you're able to add more constructors with different parameters. But in our case, we need only the single parameter. And we implemented our getNameSelected tool. How to test it? We created custom tool. You're able to add that tool as object, or if you know how to add integer, you're just adding tool object, the same stuff. And now in our Paint class, you're able to get tools, a vector. And if you need to print that, you're able to create our for loop for we know that we iterating through the tools. Tool T is paint dot get tools. We getting our vector or list from paint program, because paint program added single tool, custom tool, and you looping through the whole collection, which is only a single item at the moment, but in future maybe adding more tools. We shouting our tool get name. And if you're printing this, you will get some results. Oh, sorry. You see that we got our custom tool, because we got all paint tools and we reading as a tool objects, because we reading our collection vector, which is vector tool, which is holding tools inside a vector. And if you're adding more tools here in future, sorry, for example, if you're creating tool pencil, eraser, pencil, eraser, and you're adding pencil, we had the same tool, and we adding eraser. Basically, we testing our classes. Is it working or not, those functions? We creating paint, we creating tools, and we adding those tools using that paint object, because we have the parent object, paint, which is a program, which is here as a window maybe, and here we have tools section where we're adding in that paint toolbox tools. And we are reading all paint exists tools. And tool is an object or current object, and you're able to get name, you're able to select tool if you need it, but it's a void function. For that reason, you're not able to print that void. You're able to call, for example, t.select tool. And our select tool function, calling each iteration that many times, how many tools there is in that collection. When you're running, you will got info. You will printing cout, and you also printing your selected pencil, your selected eraser. Basically, you're able to call your tool when you need it. But here we just testing our functionality. Is it working or not? Because in loop you never making the loop to execute or run all selected stuff. Basically, you should implement on click event if you have some UI, and on a click event you just call that select tool function on selected tool. Here it's only for testing. To remove that, and you just say that, oh, we have tools, and you select that pencil eraser. It's just looping whole vector, because in vector you're adding those stuff. And as you see here, if you're writing like this, there is tool, but you don't know which type of object and which type here. For that reason, we created separate functions, separate objects, because we know that pencil has draw, eraser has erase, magnifier has zoom in, out, and so on. So we should create separate classes, like magnifier, new class pencil, new class magnifier pencil and I forgot eraser. Basically, you see a lot of stuff added here. You're able to create folders, new folders if you need, and place that, and then you just link that. And as you see, all classes the same as a tool. How to say that eraser is a tool? You should write like this: dots, double dots, and public, because we need to extend as a public stuff, or all public stuff also, and tool. When you extending or implementing inheritance, basically should include tool h file. That inheritance say that you also including file basically includes means you include all code here at the top, or a link to that code. Class eraser means that eraser now is tool, but it should complete all rules if the tool has some abstract stuff like abstract functions, but now we doesn't have the virtual functions or abstract functions. For that reason, we don't need to make any changes here, or we don't need to implement. Basically, we able to say that our eraser is tool. And what is the difference now? We got all tool stuff when you're extending from tool class. And tool has the name, get name, constructor, and select tool. Constructor we need to implement because we should copy constructor, or as I say, polymorphic stuff, polymorphism. When you have the reference to some other class for the root class. We have our eraser, we should use alt insert and constructor. Oh, why it's not showing? Nothing. I need how to see that which constructor it recommends. Override, no. You just pick constructor and it automatically creates the copy or reference to your constructor tool, as you see. That means it use the parent constructor but not yours. And that means it's reference to your tool class, to this one constructor and this one string. In other languages it's not possible to see that here is a reference to that parent class from eraser, but here you see that there is const ampersand string. That means you your direction is to that parent class reference. I know what's recommended here, explicit. It's for single parameter constructor, you should use explicit. For a multiple parameter, you don't need that. Yeah. But I'm just following that suggestions. And you have a constructor, and basically in our main eraser tool will be like this. Eraser. We should include eraser.h. Eraser C is different tool, but you understand that here is eraser but not a tool. You don't know which tool, but eraser is your real and implemented type, not abstract stuff. Eraser, and instead of tool you should create eraser. Yeah. And now we have our eraser, and when you're adding tool eraser, you're adding tool but you extending from that tool, that means eraser is also tool. You don't need to say that here's a tool, eraser. He knows automatically because you implement child class and it the same type. Eraser is a tool because he has all data which is represents tool, and eraser also has another function which is erase. By default, eraser, as you see when you extending, get name and select tool functions, inherits those two functions. And if you need to add more functions, you go to eraser class, and basically you're adding more functions as a public. Void erase. And you say that alt enter, generate, erase, and you say that cout erasing. Like this. Eraser has erase, but other classes doesn't have that. Child classes. And when you're calling erase, you're able to call erase function. Because eraser has only erase functionality, but pencil doesn't have erase functionality. And you say that erasing. And now if you have pencil, use it, say that same, extending our tool, importing, including, and our tool also should have that constructor. And explicit, okay. And we also need to implement draw, or which function? Yeah, draw. Void draw. And you just implementing draw function in pencil scope. Cout. Here it really doesn't matter, you just say that pencil is drawing. And now when you go to the main function, that's why you need a separate hierarchy stuff, because maybe eraser have erase, maybe pencil tool has different functionality. Pencil, oh sorry, pencil, but not the tool, because tool is really abstract and has the same functions for all classes, which is child classes at the moment inherits that. If you're not inheriting the tool, it's really not so flexible, and if you're updating the tool class, basically you're updating for all tools which you're using, and without the inheritance it really will grows fast, and you see that there is no separations at all. Yeah. Including pencil h file, and you're able to use the pencil. Pencil, why is pencil not? What? Pencil, public, sorry. Yeah. Here it's really strange, but you should mark that when you're extending as a public. Because sometimes you're able to extending but not sharing that. Yeah, but you should pick public, protected, or private. And now we're able to add pencil. And when you're adding, basically you have separate objects. It's really easier to identify when you're creating something. like you creating game, you need to game objects. Yeah, you have some projectiles, you have some enemies, players, and so on. You need to have groups of types, and types has the same, or child, and so on. It's easier to make that more abstract stuff, to design your main object, to implement your eraser, magnifier, and so on, and to separate functionality, because all functionality is different. As a tool, all has the same fields and functions on the parent class. When you inherit, you got all. You just copy that public stuff and protect it. And here extending, adding more functionality. And in our case, our pencil has, oh sorry, draw function. But eraser doesn't have draw, because it has only own code. And here's a different type. Basically, it's the same as when you have int a, float c. It's different type. It's the same. It's from the tool, because int float is also from character class maybe. In Java, there is character class, or not character, maybe number class. And yeah, it's a and c is from number class as a parent, because number has some representation of bytes. But here the separate types. In float, here is eraser, pencil, and different types. And when you have multiple instances, you're able to create multiple pencils if you need it. If you have a single instance, you should use some single instance or create singleton design pattern. And here basically you designing your classes like this. And we have a magnifier. And it extends to public, sorry, tool. We have magnifier tool, and we implementing our functionality, which is constructor. Basically all classes should have the constructor. And zoom in, zoom out. You're able to create private property integer in, out. I know it's in or double. If you say that from 0 to 1, maybe it's easier to understand in, out. And you should create functions for zoom in, zoom out. Zoom in, void zoom out. By default, maybe we have 1 0, 1 0. In is 1 0 1 0. It's like 100%. Yeah. In, out, or just 0 0 or 0 0. It's like default value will be 0 0 and 0 0. That means it's not zoomed in and not zoomed out. And zoom in, zoom out, just creating those functions inside the magnifier class. You say that magnifier, zoom in, and just saying n plus equals zooming in using that fraction. And zoom out using magnifier, zoom out, enter, out plus equals, minus equals maybe, minus equals 1. And of course able to write logic like if not 0, if it's 0, you're not able to zoom it out more. Like if um, if in less or more than 0, because we need, if there is zoomed in, we need zoom out, and enable zoom out if in is more than 0. But here you're able to implement your own functionality for that magnifier, how it works like. And here is a simple example how to change those values and later update your zoom in, zoom out functionality. And as you see, each tool has different functionality, because there is not possible to make that all tools have the same functionality. In some cases, like shapes, maybe has the same functionality. And later in next lecture we will discuss about that. We extending or adding more functionality, implementing those classes. And now our magnifier also able to create magnifier. Magnifier, and you should include Alt Enter. It includes magnifier. And now you're able to work with your magnifier to zoom in and zoom out. Basically now there is no property to zoom in, zoom out, how much. By default, when you're calling, you just fraction is 0.1. You're able to make custom stuff also here, to add some property to make that fraction from precision like 001 or parameter like 100 precision, 1000, 10,000 and so on. But you need to pass some parameter and make some logic how you precise zooming in, zooming out that. And basically here able to make your program like we now implemented our paint and this vector list. And here we connected tool to all those 3 child classes and implemented some zoom in, zoom out, erase, draw, and so on. When you have, as you see, tool, you don't need to say that if in future I create a new tool. For example, we have text. We created new tool text, C class text. It's really too easy to add it here. You just adding public tool, and you're adding some constructor because we need it, and explicit, and basically it's pretty much it. You created new tool is a text, which is tool type, and now you're able to create text object. Text. Implementing each file, and as you see, we adding new tool to our program. And basically, you solve the problem when you have not when you're designing and you need a universal approach. Basically, we added text without any functions, empty text, but which is also connected to our tool. Why is great when you have inheritance? Basically, if you appending new function, you're updating all childs. And you say, oh, my paint program has some new function. For example, remove tool. Without any property, just new function, remove tool. You're just implementing your functionality, removing by removing random tool, for example. Just any functionality to remove tool, but now we're not removing from our list. We should implement how to remove from list, but we do that later in the next lecture maybe. And when you're appending new function to paint H file, oh, sorry, not paint. Sorry. We need to implement in our tool, and we added new remove tool in our tool class because we are updating our tool. Alt enter, generate, and we implementing our tool. As you see, we implemented remove tool function to our tool class. And in our paint class, we should remove tool to remove. And what's happening here, basically you added duplicate. How to duplicate? Added remove tool. And you don't need update. Basically, you're updating your logic down below to all child classes. To text, to pencil, to magnifier, and so on. When you implemented remove tool in our tool class. Later we will create some folders instead of writing a lot of stuff in this single spot. In main now you're able to call updated version like text.remove tool, pencil.remove tool. And as you see, each object has own methods like pencils and inherited methods, draw for example. And text, as you see, not able to draw. Doesn't matter is it a tool or not, but it doesn't have that functionality. Yeah. Do you have any questions now? I will share that project, of